We're here at the Barrier Island Center in the kitchen. It's the end of September of 2022. The leaves are starting to change a little bit out there, and we've had some nice cool mornings. And it's a pleasure to be here with Captain Grayson Chesser, one of my carving and hunting mentors over the years, but also someone I've learned a lot about.
And your employer.
Previous employer. I think left in good standing. I'm not 100% sure about that, but we're just going to have a conversation like we used to have up to Holden Creek Hunt Club back in the day. And
Yep.
Thanks for being here, Grayson.
Well, we better clean it up a little bit if we want to get on the air.
There are different ratings.
Yeah, okay.
So, you were born up in Accomack County. Whereabouts up there?
Well, of course, like everybody else on the shore, I was actually born in Nassau-Wallace, but my family was from Assawoman.
Oh, that was a long ride.
Yeah, it was then. 3-lane road.
So Assawoman, that on the seaside? Or kind of in the middle?
Actually, I was in the suburbs. I was very close to the Tuppersville line.
Okay.
But we got our mail in Assawoman.
Back, when you were a kid, what was that area like?
It's not changed a lot. Some things have changed. Just like some things that you really wouldn't even think about. Just like when I was a boy growing up, if my cousin was hunting over on Assawoman Island, which you know how far that is. I mean, how many miles do you think that is?
Yeah, it's, I don't know, 8-10 miles as the crow flies, maybe?
Yeah.
Or
I mean, I could hear my cousin shoot.
not a lot of background noise.
From where we lived. If it was a northeaster, you'd hear the surf roaring. The train come down through McKinney Park, you'd hear the whistle.
Yeah.
So quite a bit, things like that, quite a bit different. NASA started on Wallops the same year I was born, 47, but their presence back then, I don't even think it was NASA. I think it was before it was NASA, but was pretty benign. So it was quite a bit different. Things were either revolved around either agriculture or seafood. It was funny. I was reading a book by Furl Sams in Eastern North Carolina, and so much of that was so much like I grew up. Like I kind of had this internal hierarchy of people. It was what type of land you owned. If you owned Bojack soil, you were kind of up here. You had potato land. If you had Bojack, Mundan or Nemo, you were a little further down the social ladder. I always felt like my mother did very well because she was born and raised over Jenkins Bridge where we live now, and the land over there, a lot more of it is Nemo. And so I kind of felt like she'd done very well to get my father because it was all Bojack over there.
Did your family farm when you were growing up, or?
As long as I can remember, on my father's side, the only one who one was a blacksmith, my great-great-grandfather, but he probably farmed too. Most of them farmed, on my father's side, they farmed during the summer, and then they worked on the water in the winter, oystering, that type of thing. My mother's side, they were all farmers.
I know when you were quite the prodigy in high school. I know that I think you got some prestigious awards from your peers. Weren't you voted the?
Yes, I did. I was voted the best dressed, and that and my girlfriend at the time and I were king and queen of the sweetheart dance.
Oh,
that was the only two things I ever got in high school. And when I was on the board of supervisors for Accomack County, and it came time to present the valedictorians award to the whoever it was at Arcadia, I would always ask Mr. Gray, who served on the board with me, and had been principal there, to do it, because I felt like nobody ever graduated from Atlantic High School who did less than I did. And I felt like it'd be kind of hypocritical, but anyway.
Well, you've done a lot of interesting things over the years. Did you farm with your dad at some point, or?
Yeah, I started in '63. I was still in high school, and I had like 5 acres of potatoes, and then I farmed through college, and we farmed up in. My father died in 1970, the same year I graduated from high school, and we farmed up until '82, but 1970 was such a bad year. I mean, it was brutal, and we could never, ever really recover from that. And probably the last 2 to 3 years that we were farming, I was making all my money to support myself, guiding or making decoys. And the only thing that we took from the farm was our health insurance and the gas from my pickup.
Wow.
And still losing money. So, but it wasn't that hard a transition, because when I was a kid, all I ever wanted to be was, once I got over the Roy Rogers phase, was to be a hunting guide and a decoy carver. But that's not a very realistic thing to think that you're going to do, especially back then, because there was no demand for decoys. Most guys start making decoys when they're in their teens or early 20s. Well, like with my father's generation, they were all in the Pacific or in Europe fighting. And when they got back, they were playing catch up. Plus you had commercial decoys like plastic and paper mache come on the market, which were so much cheaper and lighter weight, and so it wasn't really that much demand for hunting decoys. And the only people that really saw the true value in decoys, it was a few collectors like Bill Mackey and some others, but you also had some folk art people that realized just how good they really were. And so, I mean, to think that you were going to make a living making decoys was about as unrealistic as you could get.
When did you make your first decoy? Was it back before your decision to kind of change careers, or?
Oh yeah, a lot before. I think the first thing I made was right about 1960. I've still got it. It's a miniature flying goose that I made for my great grandmother, and I made the head out of a little twig, and I made the wings out of slats on a potato basket, and gave it to my great grandmother. And then when I started, I grew up on hunting stories. I tell people, instead of hearing about the 3 bears, I heard about Dan, Nancy, and Junk Bill, my father's 3 best coon hounds, and Crip, my grandfather's live decoy. And I mean, they were like my bedtime stories. And so I grew up with that, and my father was never a big duck hunter like I was. He did a lot when he was young, with my grandfather over on Wallops, basically hunting the edge of dark night, moonlight nights, and with live decoys and bait. And but some of my classmates, starting in about seventh grade, they started duck hunting and that type of thing. And I worried my father to death to take me duck hunting. Well, he wasn't into it at all, but he was a game warden at the time. And game warden then, it was far different than it is now. You know, things were a whole lot looser. And so he called the other wardens and asked them if it'd be all right if he brought me along, because at the time the state had a 42-foot boat called a John D. West that they kept in Watchaprig, and Milton Dowdy was the captain of her. And so he asked him if I could come, and somebody had to stay with the boat, make sure somebody didn't burn her while you were working, because things were different on that part too, you know, in those days. And just because you were a game warden didn't mean people wouldn't tackle you. And so we went down, they were working in the swash, or they were going to work in the swash behind Watchbrig. And Milton Dowdy, he had to stay with the boat. So Carol Crapper brought, he was another game warden, he brought 3 decoys. One of them I still have. And one was a paper mache with the bill shot off, and the other one was a hog island decoy that had been reheaded. And one was actually a very nice black duck that I still have. And so Milton put me out on a point with some life preservers to set on, and the 3 decoys. And I can remember some guys riding by in a boat, pointing at me and looking at me and laughing. And but I killed an old squaw on a goldeneye. Man, I was just like somebody took a hit of crack. I was hooked from then on. And I you know, immediately started getting interested in decoys, because when I was a kid, you know, I was always a kid in whatever grade it was who was interested in art, you know, drawing and things like that. And the only A I ever got in high school was in art. And so all of a sudden, here were the 2 things that I really loved, like art and hunting, and you combined them both together. And so I immediately started picking up decoys. You know, they weren't worth anything at all, and trying to make them. And the first ones I made, I think was in the 8th grade, because we had shop. And that summer, my cousins went up to Vermont, and my mother and I went along, and we saw an ad for Shelburne Museum. And of course I wanted to go, and they have, you know, still have a great decoy collection, and at the Dorset House. And we went over there, and it was I'll never forget her, bless her heart. It was this elderly docent there, you know, black dress, black shoes, soles this thick, hair in a bun, glasses. She'd probably been there for 2 weeks and not seen a soul, you know, and here was a little kid that was interested, you know, and she said, I'm not supposed to do this, but you come with me. And she carried me through the whole museum. I mean, now you'd have to call everybody you knew and set it up way at a time and all that, and to get a tour like that. And while I was there, I bought this little book called, well, I bought 2 books. One was called Duck Decoys and How to Make Them by Eugene Conant, and which was the only thing at the time on making decoys. And then I bought the little it's a little book that called Decoys at the Shelburne Museum, and they had a pair of Clark teal in there by Dr. Edgar Burke. And so I decided I was going to try and make something like them. So I made them, and I didn't really have any good tools. And so they came out roughly shaped like a shoebox. And, with the edges rounded off. So I carried them over to Miles Hancock because I'd met him.
Was he on Chincoteague?
Yeah, he was on a Chincoteague. He'd started as a market hunter when he was about 13 years old. He was basically, his father was still alive, but at that time, if your mother died and your father couldn't take care of you, they gave you to somebody. And it wasn't a social net. And so he'd started market hunting when he was about 13, and he was older then. He was in his 70s at least. And at that time, everybody assumed decoy carving was going to be something that would just be gone. And so, because there were no guys from the World War II generation, but there were still guys from the World War I generation, and they were so tickled to see somebody who was interested in it. I mean, it wasn't classes or anything like that. Anything like that was just unheard of. And they were all so happy to see a kid that was interested that, I mean, nobody could be any better to you. And I carried him over these decoys I made over to show him, and he looked at them, and he was so nice. He would never ever say anything to hurt anybody's feelings. And he said, "You got a really good paint job on them." Said, "But I think it would help if you rounded them up a little bit." and so that's how I got started. And he probably had as big an influence on me as anybody, because really and truly, I learned how to carve from the old carvers, because it wasn't all this reference material you have nowadays. And even the ones who were dead and gone, where I started collecting decoys, I had their decoys, so I had them to study, and that's what I studied, like Dave Watson. I always admired the way he painted. Now the Wards were still alive, and I'd go up and see them sometimes. And Lloyd Tyler from Chrisfield, I'd go see him quite a bit. And Miles Hancock, and there were some others. Cigar Daisy, he was really just starting to carve a lot about that time. And I'd go see him, and they were all, I mean, nobody ever turned me down. Or, now it's like a lot of guys don't want to share but so much information because this is a secret or that's a secret. Wasn't any of that. And I always felt like there was no way I could repay those guys for all they taught me except to teach other people. And that's what I've always tried to do. And, enjoyed it. And a lot of people that I've worked with over the years have made some pretty good stuff, including yours truly.
Oh, thank you.
And
now I know what you meant when you told me that's a pretty good paint job, but you need rounded up a little. I get it now.
I forgot that, PG. But
I tell you, decoys is really kind of taking you all around the country after that too, haven't they? I mean, I know you did a lot of shows, got to meet a lot of people from different regions.
oh my God, yeah. I mean, at one time I could have probably traveled from Maine to Florida and never been over an hour away from somebody I knew. And, met people from, well, we did shows all up and down the East Coast. We go to all the decoy auctions up in New England every summer. We'd stay a week, 10 days up there, Dawn and I. Dawn was always a salesman because, you know, it's hard for you to tell somebody how good you are, but your wife can do it.
I've heard that you all were quite the team.
We were.
Pete Peterson said it was a match
I
made
used
in
to tell
heaven.
people we worked like lions. I said the lioness starts them off, and she chases them to the male. And that's kind of the way we worked. And she was a good salesman. And you know, when the Virginia Folklife, Virginia Foundation for the Humanities gave me the Virginia Heritage Award, Dawn doesn't like publicity. If she was sitting in this chair, she'd be going nuts. You'd have to give her tranquilizers. But I told him, I said, my wife's not going to like what I'm getting ready to say because she doesn't want any attention. I said, but anybody who knows me knows that if it wasn't for my wife, I'd be living in a single wide trailer with 2 Labradors. The second bedroom would have my bandsaw in it, and we would all have fleas if it wasn't for my wife. And there's a whole lot of truth in that. I mean, you've been around her enough.
Oh, yeah.
So, I mean, she was a go-getter, and she always pushed me too. But we talk sometimes about what a really good life it's been and all the people we've met, and you know, a lot of them are still good friends. Of course, you know, I'm one of these people who still keeps their Rolodex, which most people might see this probably won't even know what it is, but I never throw the people that die out. I just leave them there, and now it's to the point where I can flip through it and, well, he's dead, he's just about dead. He's still alive last time I heard, you know, and I'm not big on technology. Bobby Richardson, you know, used to be one of the biggest decoy dealers it is. He's in his 80s now. It was after one of the Folklife festivals, and Bobby is, I mean, he's college educated, taught school, smart as a whip, but basically at heart, he's a redneck. And he called me up and he said, and he talks real proper, and he said, Grayson, he said, I have a question I'd like to ask you. I said, go ahead. He said, well, you know, I think the world of you, and we've been friends for years, and I'm afraid I might offend you. I said, Bobby, you're not going to offend me. Ask whatever you want. He said, well, you know, I think the world of you, and I wouldn't do anything to hurt your feelings. I said, I know that. And he said, well, Grayson, I said, don't worry about it. He said, what I'd like to know, he said, now Grayson, you know what I think of your decoys, and I think very highly of them. He said, but you know as well as I do, there are a lot of good carvers in this world. I said, absolutely. He said, well, what I want to know is, why does the Smithsonian keep asking you to do things? I said, Bobby, I said, that's easy. I said, if you're behind times a little bit, you're backward. But if you're behind times enough, far enough behind times, you qualify as a museum exhibit. He says, let me say that puts it very well, and that explains it perfectly, and nobody could have said it better.
Well, you definitely have told me, and I've met some of them, but with the decoy collecting world and the decoy making world, there's some real characters out there.
It is, and back in the 70s and early 80s, it's changed quite a bit, because at that time, everybody there came from an association with hunting, pretty much.
Right.
And it didn't matter whether they were super wealthy or didn't have two nickels rubbed together. And it was pretty well level playing field. You know, that's one of the things I always liked about it. You know, you might have somebody who was David Rockefeller's personal attorney, and you might have some guy who was a clammer, and they were all on equal footing. And but you had the folk art people who came at it, and they were a small minority, but they came at it from a different perspective. They came at it from the art perspective. And it was really interesting to talk to them because they were very intelligent people, and they had a different perspective than what somebody like myself would. And it's changed now somewhat because of the amount of money involved. Right. And it attracts a different type of person who wants to collect things that are worth a lot of money and are status symbols. But it's still quite a bit like it was. Not as much as I'd like to see it, but because I miss those days. And the auction houses now dominate everything, yeah. Which is good and bad. But it was a lot of fun. I can't tell you. It was like a big family reunion, and we'd stay up when we'd go to a show. We'd pick somebody's room, and we'd stay up till 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, drinking, telling stories. And I mean, you know how well I like stories. I don't care whether you can be an arsonist, a thief, drug dealer, anything. As long as you can tell a good story, I'm willing to sit with you and listen. And it's like a character flaw I have. I was explaining to my daughter one time about how she needed to be careful about somebody she was hanging around with. And she said, "Daddy, if there's anybody in this world who should not ever say anything about somebody's friends, it's you." And I thought, well, what can I say? She's got me there. But it's true, and so many of the people that were in the decoy business were great storytellers. Yeah. And you know, you'd stay up till 3 o'clock in the morning, and you'd have to go to the show and stay till 6, 7 o'clock at night, and then try to go get something to eat, and then
do it all over again. And
well,
your kind of ambition for carving and guiding and everything really played out. I know you went when farming was had become quite difficult. You decided to take the leap into guiding and form your was it Holden Creek Gun Club? I guess what time period was that when? Actually,
I was guiding even when I was farming.
While you were farming?
I was doing it in the winter, and it was something I always wanted to do. And I can remember. Well, you know Jerry Wilsey. The first time Jerry came down and hunted with me, it was in the early 70s, and we didn't have two nickels rubbed together. And he had a good hunt, and he told me at the end of the hunt, he said, you know, I started not to come, because it's been such a bad year. Said, but Teddy McKeldin, who used to hunt with me, his father used to be governor of Maryland. He said, you need to go down there and meet Grayson Chesser, because he lives the life we all dream about. And Dawn was just about half asleep, and she rolled over and said, well, he's a damn fool. But I came to realize that he was absolutely right.
Yeah.
And but I always liked it because I wanted to be just as close to nature as I could be, you know. And you've probably read Jose Ortega Gasset, the Spanish philosopher. He wrote Meditations on Hunting, and he said that hunting was the ultimate intercourse with nature. And he talked about a lot of that type of thing. Because like when you're hunting, I mean, I love bird watching. I love all of it. But when you're hunting, it's like you just took it to a higher level. You know, it's like everything is more acute, and I always loved that, and I loved the fact that I could make a living by hunting, because I loved hunting myself, but I really enjoyed taking people hunting because I enjoyed sharing it with them. I enjoyed the people, enjoyed meeting them and learning about their lives, and met all different kinds of people. I mean, I counted up the other day, I've carried people from South Africa, Uzbekistan, India,
England.
Italy, a lot of
Richmond.
Richmond, California,
Oh,
and England, Canada, you know, all sorts of foreign countries. And it was really, you met a lot of interesting people. And, you know, a lot of times when we were in the blind, I would think, you know, now what's this guy getting out of this? And I think that if the truth was known, most of them, whether they had really thought about it and could articulate it or not, but they wanted that intense connection with nature. And
you wound up with a lot of clients over the years for decades coming, and really got to know them and see their kids grow up, and they saw your kids grow up.
Yeah, kids grow up and come with us, and always really enjoyed taking kids. The year that I quit, I don't know why it happened, but I had like 4 different guys call me up and tell me that the first time they'd ever waterfowl hunted was with me, and they were all still waterfowl hunting, and told me about, you know, what a good experience it was, and they still hunted, and some of them hunted with their fathers, and that, and like 3 out of the 4 I could remember, and could remember today, and could remember what we got, because I was, you know, it was always a lot of pressure on you when you had kids. Because one thing, you got to be extra safe. You don't want to do anything that's going to turn the kid off from hunting, or, and you want to make sure it's a good experience for them. And I really enjoyed that part of it. But I enjoyed pretty much all of it. About once over 5 years, you would get a jerk. And I always felt like, you know, that was God's way of showing me how fortunate I was to have the rest of the people. And so.
Well, you guys, when you developed and initiated Holden Creek Gun Club, that was interesting to me hearing that story, because it was family land, and your lodge and everything was really really a neat experience. It wasn't just hunting; it was the lodge experience. It's some fantastic eating.
There where I live, you know, I've kind of got into genealogy a little bit, just like you have, and that was the first settler on the creek was William Anderson. I think he was probably treated with Indians. He was a member of the House of Burgesses, but he also got thrown in jail one time for trading with Indians. And up in the Pocomoke Sound area, you had a lot more Indians, because you had freshwater creeks that emptied into the Sound. So you had a lot of the plants that they depended on for starches, like they called it tucko, but it was duck potato, arum, pickerel, things like that. And he married a woman whose husband had gotten a land grant to 900 acres on the south side of Holden Creek, and he moved up there, and he had two daughters. One married Francis McKemmy, who basically was kind of the guy who founded Presbyterianism in the New World, and then the one that I'm descended from, who I believe she married, I think it was a Wise, and but I'm descended from him on both sides because up that way we have the same. If you go back 14 generations, you're gonna find you got the same grandpa probably 2 or 3 times, and because there wasn't that many families, and so I quit guiding in the early 80s when duck populations went down, and I was doing very well buying and selling old decoys and making my own decoys, but I always missed it. And it would be rush, 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 get ready for Easton. And, you work like 30, 40 days straight, I mean, every day. And 10, 12-hour days. And then when Easton was over, you'd hunt for a few days, and then it was rush, 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 get ready for Christmas. And then pretty much all January I would hunt. And by the end of January, we were as broke as convicts. So finally my wife said, I finally figured out you're never going to stop this, so we might as well make some money out of it. So, but this time we're going to do it my way. And we had fixed up the barn there on the property, which was in really rough shape when my grandfather left. Of course, everything there was in rough shape.
So this was some family property.
Yeah. Well, I don't know that it had ever been owned by anybody who wasn't at least a cousin. And so we had fixed up the barn, and my wife bought and sold antiques, and we used it like a gallery for my decoys and the old decoys I bought and sold. So we took that and fixed up 2 bedrooms, and then, actually 3, because there's one up in the loft, and put in a library up there, and bathroom and all that. And the hunters stayed right with us, and my wife took care of the lodge and all the cooking, and we had great people that worked for us, Joanne Johnson and Maxine McCready and Dolores and Billy Harrison cooked for us for a while, and we had so much fun. It was unbelievable. And some of the stuff we did was unreal.
I know.
I know. Yeah. But
you also had, I remember you telling me some stories of some of the older guys that guided with you. They were real characters too. I don't know if you had
Ronnie Marshall, he was the first guy who guided with me when I started back. I've got a thing home where my father caught him when he was, about 18. He was in the state marsh on the wrong day with live decoy, unplugged shotgun, and bait. And but he'd also been a deputy federal warden, and he guided all his life, and he helped me for a good while, and really knew his stuff. But when I had you and Andy Dunton and Drew Sturgis, we really hit our stride then. The 3 of you, I never worried at all about whether you were going to make me look bad or I had complete confidence in every one of the three of you. You all knew just as much about it as I did.
It was a lot of fun up there. I tell you, I miss it. I like coming up there.
Oh yeah.
Just visiting now, but I don't do it enough. But it was a great experience get to know some of those folks.
Yeah, oh yeah. It was unbelievable fun, and the people we had work there at the lodge. Jim Johnson and Chunky.
Chunky.
They were all a lot of fun too.
Aren't they though?
Yeah.
Yeah, I learned about having too much fun, and
that's right. Chunky got put in jail for having too much fun.
Yeah.
And
I think there was a taser involved, or
that's right. Well, actually, you told him that you'd been incarcerated once for having too much fun.
oh, did I?
Yes, you did. 'Cause I remember that. Some things my memory slips on, but some things stick, and that stuck. And Chunky said, "What do you mean having too much fun?" And you started explaining to him. He said, "Oh, I got put in jail for having too much fun too." And I told that cop, "You put that taser down and see what happens." And you said, you realized that Chunky had taken having too much fun to a much higher level than you had.
This is true. I've heard so many great stories over the years in duck blind with you, but one of my favorites, I can't remember, there is a mermaid story. Was it your grandpa that saw a mermaid in Assawoman Creek, or?
Absolutely. A lot of Chessers were a little bubble off center, and I don't think my mother was all that keen on having children, afraid that I might inherit some of those traits. But my grandfather, him and my grandmother separated, and she always did say that she never met a Chesser that wasn't mean as a snake. And I used to tell her, I say, "Claire, I don't know what you did to poor grandpa to make him move a place as hot and miserable as Florida." She said, "That's not half as hot and miserable as where he'll end up." But anyway, my father and my grandfather, they could not get along. They were just like this, even though they loved each other. And we go down and see him every couple of years. And of course, when when I got so I started hunting too, that really gave us something in common. And so he started telling me this story about how he'd been over on wilds hunting. He was shorebird hunting, and it was in the early fall. And he was right about where the bridge goes over, and he saw something coming down Cat Creek. And he looked, and he thought it was a kid, because people used to go over there on beach parties all the time. And he said, so he kept watching, and he kept coming closer, and then he thought it was a doll baby. And he said, and then I realized what it was. He said it was a mermaid. And I could look at my grandfather's eyes, and I could tell this was not the time to crack a smile, because he was dead serious. And he said, and I crawled right up to the edge of the grass. He said, but when I cocked my hammer back to let her have it, said she dove, so never did come up again. And
he was going to ground truth her.
Oh yeah.
Audubon
well,
style.
Mermaids can't fly, so if you're going to shoot one, you got to shoot her either sitting on the land or on the water. But anyway, I mean, I don't know what he saw. I think probably a harbor seal.
Yeah.
But I know one thing. He thought he saw a mermaid, and there was no convincing him any different. But actually, I remember the first decoys I ever saw, and I was about, I don't know, maybe 4, because I used to love to play in the barn. because I always liked the horses and the mules, and my father had them back then. Because he was still using them on the farm, but in the winter he would cut timber and use them cutting timber. And I always loved going in that barn, and all the harness was in there, and it smelled so good, that old leather, and the hay and straw and all. And I remember it was in a box sitting in the corner. There were these birds. I didn't know what they were, and I can remember taking them out and playing with them. And I remember I really liked the way they felt. And they were all worn, no paint at all. And now I know what they were. What they was tack-eyed Mason Decoy factory plovers with all the paint gone.
Oh, okay.
But by the time I'd gotten old enough to start collecting decoys, which was I was about 4 then. I started when I was about maybe 10, 11, 12. They'd torn the barn down, and all that stuff got hauled out. So, but I can remember going in there and playing with them, and just I loved the way they felt and the way they looked. But it's hard to think that something like that, sticks in your memory.
Yeah.
But it did.
I'll tell you, Grayson, it's been really interesting talking to you. I appreciate you taking the time to sit down. And I won't ask you to recite any poetry or sing any songs today. Maybe we can do that another time. But those that know you knows that they can be quite entertaining as well. But thanks for sharing, but also thanks for sharing knowledge about decoys to the folks that you've helped over the years, including myself. And yeah, really enjoyed it.
It's been a pleasure.